welcome. About 15 years ago, I was one of the seminal people that started this thing. It was a lot different back then. We had about 6 people in the room, so I'm glad to see it carries on. I spent the last 4 hours with my NIH program officer for my K-12 program, so I've been talking NIH for 4 hours. So I'm going to talk NIH for another 30 minutes. And I think the best way for me to convey information is to just steal it. So I stole NIH slides from a woman named Sally Alvarado with her permissions. So I think this is the most accurate information I can give you. I will make a few assumptions. If I say something you don't get, like if I make an assumption, just raise your hand so we can kind of have a little bit of a dialogue as we go through. So when you submit your application, it goes to a place called CSR, and that's the place that refers the grants. And they have scientists and experts that look at your grant application and try to decide the right study section for it. So it's that center is kind of its own separate entity, and you can write a cover letter that tells them where you want it to go. And sometimes they'll actually override your cover letter because they know better than you that that study section isn't right for you. But the CSR is the one that does the grant referral. So that's the first place it goes, and it's outside of what they call OER, the extramural education, extramural research. Sorry. It's my daughter. My daughter's doing an MD PhD, and she's just starting in lab. And so she's getting uptight about some of her experiments, and so she's calling me about them. And she's my little girl, but I'm not going to answer her because I want to give you guys my attention. But now she's going to continue to call me nonstop. So if she does again, I'll pick it up and tell her to call me back in a minute. All right, then, so it goes from CSR, and then it'll go to your study section. And what happens is there's a man or woman that is the SRA. Okay, I don't know if you've ever heard these terms, the Scientific Review Administrator, or SRG. And this person has to read all 60 grants that they get, grant applications, and get to know them enough to decide to give them out to a couple of different reviewers to look at. And then after it's reviewed, and you might have heard this statement before, that the review panels score you on merit, but the institutions fund. The institutions are the ones that write the checks. And they rely extremely heavily on that peer review. And the score is from 10 to 90, with 10 being the best and 90 being the worst. But even worse than 90 is getting streamlined. We still use the word triage because that's the old word. We also still use the word pink sheets for summary statements. So I'll use those words interchangeably because I'm old enough to tell you that I used to submit NIH applications by photocopying them and putting them into a big box and mailing them to 6701 Rockledge Drive. But now you do it all online. Anyway, so it has to go through your special emphasis panel or your study section to get scored. Let's talk a little bit about how it works there. This SRO is a person that you can talk to. Your SRA, or Scientific Review Group Administrator, they're not supposed to talk to you. And in fact, they can be kind of rude if you do get in touch with them. They're the ones that run the grant, run the review application process there in the room. And they have different ways that they run the review. Like, for example, most of them put the grant applications first that are resubmissions, called A1s. You're familiar with this term? A0, A1? Have you heard that yet today? Okay, no. That's first amended. So A0 is the first application you send in. The A1 is the first revision, the first amended. So they usually do the A1s first, and then, this is a little thing that you might want to know, most SROs, most of the people that run the grants, they take them in the order that they were submitted. So that's why it's not such a great idea for you to submit your grant at 4:59 p.m. and hit the button to go. You know why? Because it's going to be near the end, and everybody wants to get on the damn plane and get the hell out of Bethesda. So they get tired, and they shortchange you. So there's a little bit of gamesmanship to that to get your application in fairly early, because the optimal time that I've seen in grant reviews where you get the best scores is not the first one, because everybody comes out of the gate and they're all sort of fired. They drank too much coffee, and they don't really do that great with the first one. They sort of tear it up. And then the second one gets a little bit better. I'll tell you the one that gets the best is after the first morning break. So everybody gets a little bit tired, and they've had about 2 hours, and then you go out and get some coffee and get something to eat, and then you come back, and then that next grant after the morning break, I swear, everybody likes it more. So you're sitting here like, holy crap, this is such, like, really, are you serious? Well, there's so much of this that is about probabilistic luck, meaning that you just have to keep at it. I mean, there's little things you can do, like try to get the right study section, and don't submit your grant last. The other thing is keep resubmitting. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute, that out of the average study section, you're going to have maybe 30 peer reviewers in a standing study section. If it's a special emphasis panel, it might be 5, it might be 15, there might be 3 call-in people. Can't really tell what a special emphasis panel is going to have on it. But if it's a standing study section, about 30 reviewers. Now, just sort of right off the bat, if you submit an application, I'm going to say to you that half of those reviewers are going to like it, and half of them aren't. You got to get 3 of them to like it. So what's the probability, just drawing random, that you're going to get 3 out of the half that kind of like it right off the bat? It isn't that good. You're likely to get 1. It's always reviewer number 3. You've seen this thing of Hitler talking about reviewer number 3, right? That happens all the time. You get 2 people that like it and 1 person that doesn't. And that's all it takes to not get funded. So think a little bit about this as just keep going at it, because you've got to get 3 out of 3 that like it. So the reviewers also, you know, they're experts. Almost everybody on the grant review committee has the grant that you're applying for. So like if it's an R01, all of them have that. If it's a K23, all of them have R01s. By the way, when they do Ks, they usually stack them like as an extra day on top of R01 applications, and it depends on how they do that too. Some of the SRAs do it last, and some of them do the Ks first. But they are in a super duper hurry with K grants. They just are trying to get through those things fast as they can in the review. When you write your grant, at least if you're like me, you're writing your introduction and your application, and you know what you start thinking about? You start thinking of the one expert in the world who knows as much as you do about it, and you end up writing it toward that person. But guess what? You're not getting that person. You oftentimes get somebody that knows very little about your project at all, that doesn't have any real expertise in it, but knows a lot about research and how to write grants. And maybe if you're in heart, lung, and blood, you might get a pulmonologist reviewing your heart grant. You don't know for sure what you're going to get. So you have to really keep in mind that you're writing for more of a general audience, even though these people are all experts, have stature in their field, mature judgment. How do you know that? You don't know that till you get into the grant, until you get into the review process. I have seen in one grant review process that there was an individual who was talking about human subjects and said something about, well, all of these people are going to be incarcerated anyway, made this statement. And I don't think he meant to make it that way, but he said it. And the SRA talked to him afterward. The SRA kicked him off. So the SRA said, you're out of here, because he felt that the statement was just so inappropriate. And the reviewer didn't even really know he was doing it. So when you talk about mature judgment, there is sort of this parent in the person in the room that's supposed to keep things under control. Doesn't always work like that, though. I've been in a grant review process where I've seen the SRA bring up the next application and say, this is an application from an unknown group that is submitting their first application for the first time. And then in the same guy in the same session, and if anybody's from Johns Hopkins, I'm sorry, I'm just telling you what he said. He said, and here is an excellent application which you would expect from Johns Hopkins, who of course are experts in the field. And this is him introducing the application and then going to the primary reviewers. So the SRA, if they talk about mature judgment, sometimes the people running the group, the SRAs, have mature judgment, and sometimes they don't. I'm trying to give you the inside scoop. What can you do to control that? You get your review, and you look at your summary statement. And if you think there's something in there that doesn't make sense, like this is an emergency doctor who thinks that he can do pulmonary embolism research. Had those statements, had those words in a review. Now, that's been 20 years since I've seen that before, but you used to get that crap. And if you get it, then that's the kind of thing that you can take to your program officer and talk about. Program officer, again, is the one that you can talk to. And I mentioned this already. SRGs are the standing study sections, somewhere around 30, maybe even more folks. There's a saying that the only thing worse than reviewing for the NIH is not reviewing for the NIH. And this is a great opportunity to get better and learn, but they just give you a big stack of applications. And, you know, this is like house shopping. You got to go through these applications, and a lot of it is, you know, like curb appeal. You look at the title and you look at the basic aims, and you're like, I'm not interested in this. And it's just all downhill from there. Just sort of, they got 10 or 15 of them they have to score, and it's whether they like it or not. Did you get the half of the grant review panel that actually likes your grant? If you get one that doesn't, they give you a 5-on approach. Pretty much all it takes to not get funded. Pretty much all it takes to get triaged, actually, is just to have one you don't like. So much of this is just luck of whether you get one that likes it or not. The people that serve on the chartered SRGs, they get to actually submit their applications anytime they want. That's the one benefit they get. They don't have to do the deadlines. So, you know, I guess technically you could submit yours anytime you want, but you have to wait for the next deadline. And they can submit like really late, like up till a month or so after the usual deadline, so they get more time. It's the one perk. And the special emphasis panels are put together. They usually start off with a Z. That's the letter you'll usually see to designate a special emphasis, an SEP. And yeah, this is just a little bit about the different reviewers. I think one reason I wanted to keep this slide was male reviewers. Okay, this is mail-in, but it's all call-in reviewers. So this matters in emergency care, and I'll tell you why. When you're submitting your application, you're probably going to want to ask for an emergency physician to review your grant. You will get debate between the SRAs as to whether they are obligated to do that or not. Jeremy Brown, who is the director of the Office of Emergency Care, he will tell you that it is their job to do that. But you can talk to them, and if you can get one of them to talk to you, some of them will, some of them won't. That's different than the program officers. Program officers are the ones you're supposed to talk to. Program officers will tell you, yeah, you absolutely have the right to ask for an emergency physician in your cover letter. Jeremy Brown will tell you that. I can tell you that sitting on grant review panels and talking to SRAs, they're like, we'd blow that off half the time. They don't do it. Well, if they pay attention to you and do it, most of the time, your emergency physician is going to be one of these call-in reviewers. So they're going to be on the phone with a bad connection trying to defend or not defend your grant. And it's a lot different than having the person there with the nonverbal, and you got to go out and have a drink of coffee with them, than it is having that call-in. And you'll kind of know who your reviewer is sometimes, because there'll be this one call-in person that's done chest pain research in emergency medicine, and that's your topic, and you can figure out why they had that person call in. So there's nothing that we can do to overcome that little deficit, meaning you put on your letter, want an emergency physician, it ends up being the call-in person, except have more people like you who get in the pipeline and ultimately work your way up to be regular reviewers. That's the only way around it. So you usually get 3 reviewers unless you do a clinical trial. If you do a trial, especially if it goes to heart, lung, and blood, they have their own trials unit, the CTRL, I think it is. That will give you, you might get 6 or even 7 reviewers. You might have 3 statisticians, but usually you get 3. A primary, a secondary, and then what's called a reader. But any one of them can trash your grant because they get the same amount of score when they put the scores into the Commons site. They all have the same weight. So all it takes is one of them to not like you, to give you an 8 on approach for you to get triaged. So anyway, they make a big deal about managing this conflict of interest thing. They ask the reviewers a million times, do you have any conflict of interest? And just for example, you can't review any applications that come from your institution at all. So that makes it so that if you're in a giant institution, there might be a lot of friends you have that couldn't possibly review your stuff. They also look a little bit to see where you just came from. They try not to get a reviewer that was in your department that you just left, but there's only so much that they can do. And then they make you sign a form that says you won't steal the ideas that you read, but I know for a fact that that happens. People are people. They get ideas from reading grants. All right, so again, I mentioned that you send your application in, the panel gives a score, the score goes to the institute. The institute has this thing called council, and the council looks at the scores, and this is a place where your program officer can really help you. The program officer is the name at the bottom of the FOA, the funding offer announcement, or the RFA. That's a person you can call, and they're usually pretty friendly to you. Some are more friendly than others. Some are more helpful than others. If they're new, a lot of times they're worthless. They are not going to advocate for you. They don't have any power, and they're scared to do anything. If they've been there a long time and they like your topic, they can be incredibly helpful to you, because they can go to council and just say, I'd like this grant on the radiation. Do you have it in my portfolio? So I would like to have it. That's Andrei Kaczynski. He is a Russian, and he is a guy that survived Chernobyl. And I know this because I got to know him pretty well, and it's kind of important to get to know your PO if you can. So if you ever go up there to NIH, go find them. Like, go to their office, hang out with them a little bit. I just hung out with mine for 4 hours, and she's got 2 dogs, and one of them barks all night, and the other one's a pit bull that's a Labrador retriever, and I could go on and on about a lot of stuff, but I think it matters a lot to get to know the PO that is going to be in charge of the portfolio that you're interested in, because they can tell you a lot. When it gets to council, if you got a borderline score, they can make a big difference for you. And Andre is interesting. That guy, he's interested in reduction of radiation. There's nobody else in the NIH that I know of could care less about doing fewer CT scans on patients. They don't. They're like, we're not interested in that. They'll just flat out tell you. But Andre is, because he's from Chernobyl. This is a little bit of a fractal, but I'm just trying to throw some things at you that are like a little bit under your control. You might be in DC, and you know you're going to apply, or you have already applied, or maybe you're lucky and you're funded. Go get to know your PO. They're usually pretty cool people. A lot of them were scientists before, or researchers, and you know what? They like to kind of mix it up with you and still be cool, and still they like to talk about their research and be real people, and say, well, when I was back at shock trauma, I remember doing this. And they like to show you that, yeah, I still got some chops. And there's nothing wrong with you playing the game a little bit and kind of giving them some respect, because they appreciate it. They're government workers, they're servants, but they were all scientists before. And they can make a difference once things go from the SRG to council. Well, the single biggest thing that makes a difference in getting funding is your overall impact score. And I mentioned that thing goes from a 10 to a 90, unless you're triaged. If you're triaged, you don't get any discussion at all in the meeting. It means you're in the worst half of the funding. And typically in any, like a review panel, we'll get 60 applications, sometimes as many as 90. And it may even have to triage more than, or streamline more than 50%. And I just had a STTR application that got streamlined with a mean score of 3. 3. So there's been a little bit of grade inflation with some things. You know, you're getting used to get triaged with a mean score of about 5 to 6. So these things kind of float around a little bit. So the overall impact just basically looks at everything: the significance, innovation, investigators, environment, and puts together that single score. And then that's the thing that they look at compared to the pay line. Not every application mechanism will give you what's called a percentile. Everyone will give you a score. RFAs, for example, requests for applications, they don't give you a percentile. If you do get a percentile, in general, you're going to get funded if you're less than 20th percentile. Lower, better, good, and less than 20th percentile. Now, funding rates are going up at the NIH. Finally get to say that after 10 years. So we're seeing now 30%. The K award at Heart, Lung, and Blood is funding at a score of a 32. And you don't get percentiles for Ks, by the way. That's another one you don't get percentiles, but they're scoring at a 32, and that's probably about maybe 35% of all applications, first applications are getting funded. So since most of you are going to be interested in a K, or a lot of you are, I thought you might want to know that good news. Jane just told me that. And Heartland and Blood is very proud of its workforce portfolio, its K portfolio, and they fund more Ks than any other institute. So the impact factor, though, is the name of the game. It's the thing that your PO can take to council and say, this got a strong endorsement from the best scientists in the country. We need to fund this. And then in addition, the PO that's been around a long time, that really knows the works, can say, you know, I want the radiation portfolio. You know, they can say the thing that matters to them. So they can advocate for you if they like your project, and probably to some extent like you. So these are the components: significant investigators, innovation approach, environment. You get a score for each one of these, but it doesn't matter. Only thing that matters is the total score that you get, the impact score. But each of these components, the two that always get the worst score are significance and approach. Approach by far being the one that gets the worst score. They never want to hurt investigators' feelings, so very, very seldom do you get a bad investigator score, but you know, you can when you just get started off. Innovation, you can get hurt on, especially if they just don't think it's innovative. Now, the best way to approach each one of these components is to go get this language. So go into the FOA or into the RFA, and they're going to give you the scoring criteria for significance, innovation. Copy them and paste them, and make sure that you're addressing each of these, because theoretically this is how they're supposed to be giving you scores, is they're supposed to be looking and say, if the aims are achieved, how will scientific knowledge, technical capacity be improved? You should be answering every one of those questions when you're writing the introduction for the significance. There is an old saying that, like, you can't get over low significance. You can't make your project more significant. It is what it is. You can't get over innovation. If people say this is repetitive, it's been done, you can't get over that. You also can't get over investigator, because you are who you are. You can always get over approach. You can just change your approach. So it's bad to not have good significance. You will see approach bleed over and hurt significance, where they're not supposed to score this on the basis of that much of your methods. But if you see how, will the successful completion of the aims change the methods, concepts, methods, technologies, and all that stuff, that's asking if it's successful, will it matter? Well, you'll see reviewers all the time just say, well, it isn't going to matter because they can't do it, or the methods are stupid, or, you know, I don't agree with the study design. So they'll hit you with its significance if your approach is bad all the time. So the significance is a little bit tethered to the approach. Investigators, you know, just keep doing the best you can. Publish. In general, you need 6 publications to get a K. You need probably 12 that are first authored that are in the same topic to get an R1. Just some rough rule of thumb. Somewhere around 6 first author up publications to be successful at a K. And it's K23 or K08 I'm talking about. Again, just read that and, you know, do your best you can to respond. This is a really great one to copy when you're writing your innovation section. Just copy this and paste it, and make sure that you're addressing every word in this. That's where you'll get your score from. And then the approach, you can read this and really think about risky aspects. That's the thing that reviewers don't like. There's an old rule of thumb: you need to have done 2/3 of the work. If it's a clinical trial, you can't have enrolled 2/3 of the patients, but they really need to understand that you have a good idea of what the outcome is going to be. You're far more penalized for the possibility that this might fail than you are for, I guess, being a little bit redundant. So, kind of a rule of thumb. They like to see that 60% of the work has been done. And then just more on approach. Got to make sure that you address the gender issue, and you have to explain why you're not including children, and that can be done in the human subjects section. But that is a scored criteria, is whether or not you're addressing diversity and addressing One thing I found, though, is the sort of gratuitous inclusion of, like if you, let me give you an example. If you try to stretch things, like I've seen grants go in for pulmonary embolism, that's my area of expertise, and the applicant starts talking about people with sickle cell disease get PE, and therefore I'm addressing a minority issue, an underrepresented minority issue. I mean, reviewers are like, no, that's like 2% of your population. They get it. So you can't kind of fake that. You have to really think of your design around addressing underrepresented minorities, women, and ethnicities. And maybe some of you work in a place where it's really, really cool to do that. I'm trying to set up a study now, and I swear I don't have an ulterior motive, I promise, in Hawaii. And like half of your patients are American Islanders. So like you can't get them anywhere else. I mean, I'm going to get them in Indiana? No way. So it's kind of an interesting diversity. Sometimes to get diversity, you have to, God, it's horrible, but go to Hawaii. And then the environment, everybody usually gets a pretty good score on environment, but just make sure you have a very good and well thought out and constructed institution page. And wherever you are, if you have a CTSA or you have any type of research infrastructure, you should have one of these boilerplate things that tells you something about all of the research that you can start with. I moved to Indiana 6 years ago, and students' facilities page has been, that was one of the things that I got a hold of the sort of a boilerplate that people had that had all the numbers and the vivarium square footage and all of that stuff. But I constantly rewrote that thing, and it took me about 5 years to get it right. So a good facilities page is not something that you can just do right now. You're going to have to get help from your mentor or wherever you go to really write this thing out. It needs to be things like if you're screening for patients in the emergency department, you need to be very explicit that we have order sets, or we have automatic paging tagged to the order of the main diagnostic test that finds my patients, that flags and texts or pages or emails 5 of our coordinators. And you need to spell that out to the reviewers so they can see that you have the environment to recruit your patients. So just think, not everybody knows what you know. You might be getting a PhD psychologist who's never set foot in emergency medicine that's reviewing your grant because you're doing a pain grant. But this is a person that happens to have some tangential expertise. But your facilities page really needs to address the feasibility and what you have at your institution. All right, so what can get you in trouble? What can help when you're doing your human subjects is use references. Like, for example, our demographic mix is 60% Caucasian, 25% African American, 10% ethnicity by Latino. And then say this matches up well with the ethnicity that's been demonstrated in national surveys. And so cite NAHAMS, cite something like that to demonstrate. So that's sometimes quite powerful, and I've had comments that say even the human subject section was well referenced. And I felt like I got a point for that. So that you did your homework to demonstrate that you are sampling a population that looks like the United States, just for example. Anybody know what a NIH definition of a child is? Age less than 18. Used to be less than 21. Now it's less than 18. So anytime you do any application, you have to explain why you're not doing it in children. And it depends. Sometimes you can just say, cancer is very rare in children, and they're fine with it. Sometimes you need a reference to demonstrate that. And it can be more difficult than you think sometimes to find that reference. But you can lose some points for not doing a good explanation for why you can't do your work in children. Maybe some of you are doing work in children purely. All right, let's see. This is a little bit more advanced stuff, resource sharing plans and select agent research. And then there's also multiple PI data sharing. I think the NIH is liking more and more seeing multiple PI applications. You're not going to have one of those for a K, but you will for your first R01. You'll really think about having a multiple PI situation. When you have a multiple PI, you have to write this thing about data sharing that basically says we're going to get along and we're going to have this panel that decides on how our data are split. What's nice about multiple PI is you can get someone that really compensates for your weakness, and it can make a big difference in the score. But there's the administrative PI. Now, what really matters to your department and your chair and where you're working is you want to be the admin PI, if you have multiple PIs. And the reason is, why? Money, yeah, indirects, because your department gets all the indirects off of the, even if, let's just say I have an application and I have a pulmonologist that's on my grant that's a co-PI. My department gets all of the F&As off of his salary or her salary. And so it's kind of like what a co-I used to be, but they just put a P in front of it. So it makes it look like it's a little more official. But if you do that, you have to have this data sharing thing. All right, and I mentioned the scores. Perfect score is a 10. The worst score that you can get is a 90, except for triage, and then they call it not discussed. And when you do this, you'll get on. Have you heard about ERA Commons yet? Have you talked about ERA Commons? Maybe a little bit. Well, it's the website that you'll follow the progress of your grant, and you'll know the day it's getting reviewed, and you can download the names of all of the people that are going to be on your panel. You don't know who's going to be reviewing it, but you'll see the names of the up to 30 people, and you can try to guess who's going to be your reviewer. And then the day after your section meets, your study section meets, you'll start going on to ERA Commons to see if you get your score. And you'll go to the list of active grant applications, and you'll click on your grant, and then you'll get down and you'll scroll down. And there's this one little area off to the left where it says impact score. And you're looking at it every day. When's it going to post? Some SRAs that night, they go home and they post the scores. AHRQ, forget it. They'll take like a week to put them on there. I don't know, it's always AHRQ, takes forever. But a lot of the NIH regular study sections, those guys and gals want to get it done, and they usually meet on like a Wednesday and Thursday, and they'll have it in by 5 p.m. on Friday. And so you scroll down, and there's this. This is the thing, you got to get ready, man. You got to get ready to do this. You're going to scroll down, and you're going to see ND. And when you see ND, what happens? You barf. At least I barf. And I've seen a lot of NDs in my time, my own, just recently. You scroll down, and you're, no, it can't be possible. They scored the wrong grant. Nothing worse than, you never know what you're going to get. You get a 40 on a grant, you address everything perfectly, you do everything you see, put same grant, improved, gets streamlined. Goes from a 40 to streamlined. Anybody know what the probability of going from streamlined to getting funded is? 7%. So what you can do with streamlined is try to get it back to a score, and on the A1, and you only get one submission, and then you can resubmit for another A0 and hope that you can move the needle some more. I got plenty of those that are new, that are redo A0s. And yeah, sometimes you really got to change things. So A1s, but the most you can move a score I've ever seen or ever heard of, maybe 20 points. You could go from maybe a 40 to a 20, but that's about the most you could do. It's really unlikely to take a 60 down to a 20. You can take a 60 to a 40 and then maybe hope that you have some kind of a topic that the council is really, really interested in. Or they have some leftover money at the end of the year, which sometimes happens, and just magically you get funded. It's one of those things that doesn't happen very often, but if you do. Okay, so when they come into the review session, maybe you know this, I don't know how much. So I mentioned the SRA introduces the application, and sometimes they do it very professionally and very exactly the same every time, and every now and then you get one that says, here's an excellent application from X institution, and here's a crappy application from a place we've never heard of. You hope that you're one of the latter, or at least that you're treated fairly. And then they ask the primary and the secondary reviewer to give their scores. and you say out your scores, 4, 3. And if they're more than 2 apart, then you have to fight it out to get them closer together. And what happens is everybody that didn't review or read the grant very well just sits there and listens to the 2 main reviewers and the reader argue things out and talk things out. And then maybe a statistician throws in his or her 2 cents worth. And then at the end, everybody does the revised scores. And pretty much everybody follows what the main reviewers say. And you do it by a little secret ballot. You just write it on a sheet of paper and hand it in. And then the SRA just looks at it and types it in the computer, and then hopefully posts your score, and hopefully you get a good score. So that's kind of the inside scoop of how it works. So now, if you get streamlined, you never get to that point. And the only way you can get unstreamlined is if what will happen is the SRA will give the list of the 60 applications, and you get to see the 30 that are going to get streamlined based on score. And anybody can resurrect a grant and bring it out and say, I really, really want to discuss this application. Maybe you misunderstood it. The funding rate for that is also in single digits. It's very unlikely that that thing is going to get rescued enough to get funded, but it would require somebody to rescue you to get it out. Again, this is where you want to be, is down here into the 1 and 2 range. Although I just had an STTR that had a mean score of 3 and got triaged. So some of this is floating around a little bit. In general, they claim. Does everybody know about open mic? Okay, make sure you go Google open mic and get this newsletter from this guy. I forget his name. And he will talk about all kinds of issues like the stability and the impact scores across the years at the NIH. He claims there's not grade inflation, but he's writing it for a reason, because there's a lot of us suspect there has been grade inflation on this, that things have gotten better. Worse? I don't know how to describe it. The scores, I think the reviewers don't want to hurt people's feelings, so they're piling up scores. And they always say use the range when you're a reviewer, but more and more people don't want to hurt everybody's feelings, so they're giving better and better scores. So there's this thinner margin between who's getting funded and who's not. But get open mic, and then also make sure that you're getting everything that comes out from the NIH in terms of grant applications. And used to be a named Susan Grove sent this thing out. I don't know who it is now, but just you can get on the listserv. And every Friday, you'll get the list of new grants and be looking at those and reading those. And I really encourage you, when you see a RFA or a FOA that looks like something you're a little bit interested in, click it and read the NIH's description of why they picked it. Why did they choose to fund this? Because that's usually a preamble that was written by an expert in that area. And it lets you think a lot about how the NIH is thinking. So I can't think of the name of it. I get it every Friday. Does anybody know the name of it right offhand? No? Yeah, I want to tell it to you. This thing is...
Feedback loop is the one I get.
No, this is God TOC, NIH funding opportunities, and it comes from NIH TOC-L at list.nih.gov, and it looks like this: weekly NIH funding notices, NIH guide for grants and contracts. And you get that every week, and I always scroll through it and say, pulmonary embolism, come on. No, 10 HIV grants. Look, investigation of transmission of Kaposi sarcoma associated herpes virus. It's like, that's all there ever is. Let's change my specialty. We'll start studying HIV so I can get some funding. No, I have nothing against HIV. I'm just jealous because we spend, I had the numbers on the number of individuals infected by HIV, something like $25 per person infected from the NIH versus like less than 1 penny per emergency care patient. So streamlining just gets things done faster at the review panel. That's the thing that it does. And I mentioned this thing about the order of review, that you usually do A1s first, and then if you get your application in, that sometimes can help you a little bit. And then I talked about the SRO or SRA versus the program officer. And the SRO can be a little bit variable, and most of the times they won't talk to you, but some of them will. The program officers, their job is to talk to you. And I really mentioned, I want to emphasize, you won't ever get hurt talking to your program officer, but a lot of times it's a waste of time. They're really not going to give you any secret sauce information that gets you funded. They can really help you not waste your time, and I can give you an example. I'm interested in empathy as an intervention to reduce unnecessary CT scanning, all right? So I went to the Center for Integrative and Complementary Medicine. I sent them my specific aims page. The woman looked at it and thought about it. I mean, she thought about it really carefully, and I talked to her on the phone, and she said, I showed it to 5 people at the institution. She said, the bottom line is we really think empathy is interesting, but we don't care about reducing CT scanning. We just don't see it as an institutional priority. So even if you score well, we're probably not going to fund you. Then that can save you a lot of time. I mean, you don't want to send an application in to an institute that's not interested in funding you, especially if you get a really good score and they don't fund you. Then you're really hurt, you know. So sometimes it can be helpful to save you time. And the new summary statement. One thing that's really changed a lot is you can get a review that says, investigator, strengths, so-and-so breathes air, eats food, appears to be alive. Weaknesses, none noted, 5. You get that stuff. It was the same thing for significance. Sometimes they just don't even want to tell you. I mean, it's not like you're going to get some long essay to describe all the reasons they find your weakness. Other times they name 50 bullets. You just don't know what you're going to get. You might get a lot of detail or you might not get any. And then this is what you have to submit there. You do these in advance, and then you amend them a little bit based on the discussion, and submit them and run out of the room and catch your plane and go home. And I want to emphasize again that like these reviews, people get tired near the end, and almost nothing gets a good score at the end of the review because everybody's tired. So get your application in at a reasonable time. And this is just more mechanism stuff. So. Okay, what about if you submit your application, can you give any updated stuff? Yeah, they still let you tell them if you had a paper, for example, that got published or is getting accepted. So that could be quite helpful, and that is something you send to the SRA, is you tell them that, you know, I just had a paper that made it that wasn't in my biosketch. The appendix, you used to put all kinds of stuff in there, but now they've really narrowed down the appendix to only data collection forms or protocols. So like if you're doing a clinical trial and you want to do a protocol-based application, you can put those in the appendix. But you used to be able to put all your papers in there on all your best stuff. You can't do that anymore. All you can do is tell them the citation and make sure that your link is updated. And I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but you do this thing in PubMed where you link in all of your publications so that when they click that one URL, they can go to PubMed and see all of your publications. And make sure you update that before the day of the review, because some people sit there in the grant review panel who didn't review your grant, but they click that because they want to see what you've done, because it's more than what's in your biosketch. So. Just some numbers again. You know, roughly, if you get 60 applications, sometimes it's 90, sometimes it's fewer than that. Half are triaged, and in 9 hours, there's a bunch of breaks. There's not a lot of time. 14 minutes for your average application, just a few minutes for each reviewer. So all this work you put into this comes down to just a few minutes. So think about that curb appeal. This is really a lot like driving up and looking at a house. So much of it is, do they like it from the very front. And then I mentioned the impact scores may or may not be put in quickly, and you get your summary statement no matter what. It says 4 to 8 weeks. Actually, all of them have to do it within 4 weeks. So summary statement will have a description called a resume that the SRA writes based on the discussion, if you got discussed. And that's the most helpful thing. And it'll say enthusiasm was dampened because. And that's the single thing, that's the take-home that you really have to address. Enthusiasm was dampened. And they'll say this thing, enthusiasm was moderate or enthusiasm was great, and that actually matters a lot, because if it says enthusiasm was low, even though you got a decent score, you really need to figure out why. And that's a great chance to call the PO and say, what was it? And sometimes they'll say, well, you know what? 2 people liked it. There was 1 person that hated it. And you can, a lot of times, get that person excluded if you have any kind of reason whatsoever to say that I read that person's review and didn't think they understood my science. And some POs will help you with that and will go to the SRA and say, I want to exclude a reviewer. That's probably the other thing that's under your control that can help your score the most, is when you go back for a revision. Try to find the bad apple out of the 3 who disliked you the most and see if you can get them excluded. No guarantee that you can. I do it all the time. Every single time I do it. I try to get one of them that I don't like out of there. Doesn't hurt you. So. All right, I think that's enough. I wanted to leave a little bit of time. I got just a few minutes here to see if you guys have any questions. I just tried to give a little bit of insight into a couple pearls and how the system works. And these slides will be available to you, but this has all the mechanisms to it. So, is that good? All right, you ready to get back together and talk about budget and letters of recommendation? Here's what I got to say about letters of recommendation. You know who writes them? You do. You. No, don't let anybody else write your letter. You write your letters and try to make them all look a little bit different. A little bit, not much. I mean, it really doesn't have to be that much. A lot of times it's just check. Yeah, you got a letter from so-and-so. But, yeah, and make sure you put in the ray line the title of the application and the name of the PI in the ray line. You know what I mean? RE, ray line. Make sure you do that, because when you're looking at these things on the compiled application, it can get pretty bewildering, and it's nice to have that on there. So always write your own letters for other people. It's another thing that's really important.
Jeff, you said you keep talking about curb appeal. Do you have any suggestions for anything specifically besides making it read well, orderly, white space? Anything people can do to help? Figures.
I think it depends on what the science is. Now, that's not. If there's any way you can draw a picture of your hypothesis, that's the first thing that I would say. And just clarity of the hypothesis and relevance of the hypothesis is the single start to curb appeal. In translational science, I do laboratory work with angiogenesis and pulmonary embolism, and drawing a picture of the mechanism, that goes on the specific aims page. But if you're doing a health services application, what are you going to do? Draw a picture of a database or something? Put that on there. You can't really do that. But if you can, if at all possible, you can draw like the logic of how this is going to affect care. That would be my single thing. I think the other thing is just my own personal preference of reading it. I don't think your introduction on your specific aims page should ever be more than half of the page. I think it should be a third, maybe a little bit more, but you just get worn out reading all that stuff. You want to get to the hypothesis as soon as you can. So I think that's another curb appeal thing, is just don't wear them out with too much of a dialogue. Let's see, is anybody talking about the paper that's going to get published in Academic Emergency Medicine on this writing an effective specific aims page?
Yeah, Ann and I have been bringing it up, it was distributed to the group here.
They got it.
This,
I think that's novel. I don't believe there's another paper like that out there. And you knew I wanted it. I actually edited that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember that or not. I actually edited. I don't do that very often, but I really wanted that paper to get published, and I think it's something that is going to be a valuable contribution. I don't know how much it's going to get cited, but it's going to be read, and it's going to be valuable to a lot of people.
We're hoping to do sort of a range of them with things like bio sketches and letters of support and things as well.
I don't get too carried away. Yeah. Yeah. But maybe a whole portfolio of them at some point. All right, what else?
Well, if there's no other questions, I think maybe a round of applause. Thank you for coming.